Hello, welcome to the NVR Podcast. This is episode 2 of series 3, and I'd like to introduce my good friend and colleague Shila Desai. Hi, Shila.
Hi, it's really nice to see you, Peter.
Yeah,
and looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Nice to have you on the podcast. And we decided to speak about stillness in the chaos, which sounds interesting. And I was wondering whether you could just, you could just speak to how we got to that topic and what it means to you.
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit to the listeners as well. My name is Shila Desai, as Peter said, and I work with PartnershipProjects and have been really privileged to have NVR as part of my life since we first met Peter in the late 2008, roughly.
Something
like that. And I think one of the reasons for thinking about this idea of stillness in the chaos was thinking about, being invited to join the podcasts and our conversations, and how much these podcasts have meant to me in my busy life, listening to you and my dear colleague Rachael, and the conversations you've both had over the last 2 seasons. And they've been sort of points in my day. I might be driving, or I might even be on my day off, and I might be doing some housework, or even when I'm stuck in the middle of sessions, and I might just pause and think, I'm going to listen to a podcast, just take a breath and just sort of bring myself back to that space. So I think the podcasts have been a real important part of my moment in my sort of day-to-day life, to just stop. So it made me think about, coming to this as my first podcast conversation with yourself. And I know dear Jill has already done a podcast with you, episode 1. And I thought maybe it's just a gentle introduction to my to our conversations here on these NVR podcasts.
So I take from what you're saying that it can feel like listening to the podcast can almost have I don't know, is that the right word to choose, a meditative quality?
Yeah, it does actually. And I really valued how you and Rachael and with Jill have those conversations that are layered, that that you might have these inner questions yourselves about, a stuckness in a supervision, or in training, or when you're working with a particular parent or a network. And there's always a nugget of something from each podcast, and I think, that's really helpful. I'm not on my own. I think that's the other thing.
Okay, so that sense of being connected, even if you're the listener and you can't at this moment join in a conversation that has already been taken place and has been recorded, it's still a sense of community.
Yeah. And as you're talking about this sense of community, I was delivering some training, and in the break, when it's face-to-face training and participants are just having a chat, and 2 of them were just talking about the podcast while we were waiting for our coffee, and they were saying, I can't wait for the next one. I'm really looking forward to it. It keeps me going. When I'm driving between my appointments, I might listen to them. And I don't know, one of them's called Rachael something. I've never met her, but really like her voice. And I thought, there's this community of people out there who value this stillness in the busyness of day-to-day challenges.
Well, I was just going to ask you because you did sort of describe a little bit the sense of stillness. I was just going to ask you, what's the chaos?
That's a really good question. I think the chaos can be all kinds of things, really. It can be chaos in your own internal mind, your own sort of thoughts about thinking about all kinds of things, pressures in your mind, emotions, frustrations, powerlessness. Then it can be in the relationship with others. Mm-hmm. So thinking about how, and I think what stillness offers, is particularly in terms of NVR, is how do we choose a response? What kind of response do we need to give? Do we need to resist more? Do we need to be still in order to navigate what direction do we need to take in the chaos of others, of your own mind, of the political systems? So I think it's layered. This layered chaos that sort of is around us.
I'm just thinking of something that Aylmer often says when you're walking down the road and there's a deep hole in the road, and you hear someone who's fallen into the hole calling for help. What do you do? Do you jump in the hole with them? Or do you say, wait, I'll get help, or I'll get a ladder? And I think it's that immediacy of suffering, and perhaps often risk as well, that can lead us into, a rather chaotic state of mind. Perhaps we work with experience chaotic states of mind, become very reactive. I was just thinking, the other day I received a referral of a family with a 14-year-old young woman who has isolated herself in her room and has signaled quite powerfully that she would like to take her life. And I realized how, when I heard about it, was another professional who got in touch with me in the first instance, asking whether he could refer, how my own level of arousal shot up, and my concern and my propensity to become reactive. And then I sort of sat back and I imagined how the teenage girl is reactive, how her parents are probably reactive to her reactivity, and then it spread through that other professional to me. And born out of a sense of real concern, yet I felt I needed to find some ground. I needed to breathe, and I needed to become calmer. I needed to self-regulate. I needed to start thinking clearly and connect with what I know. And I sort of found that not so much that I was developing a plan, but that perhaps a plan was developing in my mind, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It was sort of emerging from the information that I'd received, that the parents' relationship was very problematic. So then I sort of felt, well, it's probably safer if I see them individually first and learn about the lay of the land. And as I thought of that, and that became part of my plan, I found how I myself became yet another bit calmer. And I wonder whether that was that movement from chaos into stillness, or an example of that.
I'm really interested in what you've said there, Pete. And I'm thinking, how have you developed that? Because it doesn't, I think as seasoned practitioners, we still get caught in that, those states of chaos and suffering, especially when you have deep empathy for suffering, that we can become reactive ourselves. How do you find that grounding, that breathing? What practices, Peter, or what have you learned over the years?
I'm not really sure I could attribute it to anything in particular. I think, do you know what comes to my mind? I suddenly remembered we had a workshop, Partnership Projects, put on a workshop with an Austrian colleague, Claudia Schädler, who worked at that time in a very large center for children and adolescents with learning disabilities and, variety of difficulties. And she was the mental health sort of professional. She's a psychologist. She was the mental health professional for the entire service, which is like a village. And when there'd be an immediate crisis, they would inevitably call her. And she described in the workshop what she'd do. So first of all, if it's winter, you need to wear a coat. So she would put on her coat. She would also think, well, I don't know how long this will last. I might need to drink. So she would fill a bottle with something to drink. Also because she was very aware of her energy levels. Austrians love dextrose tablets. It's a big thing in Austria.
Okay.
So she would stick some dextrose tablets in her pocket. So she would come well prepared, but also these preparations would slow her down. They would prevent her from rushing out the door. So she said it was purposeful, and she would not have the dextrose tablets in the pocket of her coat on purpose, so that she would have to look for them, take them, put them in the pocket. That would slow things down further. And she found that by the time she then walked out the door and walked towards the site of the difficulty of the incident, that her mind would already be working differently. That her mind would be much more functional. Her arousal would have come down. And when she'd get to the site of the incident, she'd found that the people there who are, experienced caregivers would already have done some things that were helpful, that were based on their own experience, their own training, that she could build on. But they hadn't, perhaps in their own experience of chaos, hadn't been that much in touch with their own agency, with their own competence. So she said usually by the time she'd get there, she could almost ride the wave of what was going better. And I was just thinking of that. And I guess there is something about slowing oneself down and realizing, and that may come from experience, it may come from years of meditation, I don't know. Mindfulness is very popular now. Something about the appreciation that an immediate fast reaction is usually unhelpful.
I really like that example that you give about almost having like a first aid kit for cultivating stillness in the chaos. That sort of, and we think a lot about self-care and self-regulation and how we pause things. And we love this quote by Viktor Frankl, don't we, which about between stimulus and a response, there is a space.
Yeah.
And in that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. And I was just thinking about that practitioner, Claudia, and how she had, and yourself, you had a referral, she had a telephone call to help, and she paused, and you paused to create a plan.
Yeah.
And the meditative, purposeful purpose of collecting things to keep you warm, a warm drink, something to give you energy so you don't forget yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that these are habits to create and cultivate, and to be giving yourself permission. And I think they're not always easy for people. For particularly, for thinking about gender, culture, and how do people have some faith in their own right to have moments of stillness or moments of calmness before reacting. And actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking about for myself as an Indian woman coming to this country, and I wonder if this is very common for people of colour, of different races, or when you've migrated from another country, potentially in traumatic times, that there is an automatic reaction to respond to something as though it's an emergency. I know that that's in my family of origin, coming from India to England. And I think you have to also recognise those different levels. I'm thinking about a mother or a father who's having to react to their child constantly, that automatic response, and how we give permission to ourselves, how practitioners give permission to themselves, how practitioners give permission to the parents or the people that they're working with, that we don't need to respond straight away.
So rather than acting in a way that is instructive, telling parents what they should do, it's much more about when we can cultivate that stillness in the chaos in ourselves, to use that concept in NVR, the anchoring function, we can then act anchors for parents and enable parents to decide to slow down, to wait for a moment, to not react with immediacy, whether it's in accommodating the young person, whether it's calling for help, whether it's escalating with the young person and trying to make the young person stop acting out. That there are very few situations where you actually have to react with immediacy. I think when there's a danger of serious physical injury, yes, you have to act with immediacy.
Absolutely.
And people will, usually, unless they freeze. But in most cases, we feel the need to act with immediacy when perhaps we don't have to. And maybe a first step is just this evaluation. Do I have to react with immediacy? And that's a very simple bifurcation, isn't it? Okay, no, actually, right, he's trashing his room, but he has been trashing his room for 5 minutes. And okay, he might trash his room for 5 more minutes. But actually, hold on a second. What do I need? What do I need? And if we can cultivate that in ourselves as professionals working with parents, then we can help parents cultivate that in themselves. And the parent may think, well, actually, I don't know what to do. So I need to call someone. I need to call one of my supporters, for example. Oh, I know someone, and I'm a member of their support network. Not as a professional, just in a capacity of being a friend. And she texted and she said that her husband and her son are arguing again, like crazy. They're not exchanging blows. And she was going to meet a friend. Can she go out to meet the friend? And she texted that on the WhatsApp group. Can anyone out there give me advice? And what came back from 2 or 3 of us was, hey, you've often talked about how you were stuck between them when they argue. And that's not a good thing. Why don't you go and meet your friend? And then she texted back and she said, I've already left the house, but thanks for the messages. So it was almost like but by stopping to think about the supporters and thinking I'd like to get some advice from my supporters in this situation that has got me very upset, she already anticipated what we would say.
I really like that. So using your supporters as a way of pressing pause.
Yeah.
I don't need to react right this moment, and having a plan to ask the supporters, what do I do in this moment? What can I do? I don't quite know.
Yeah.
It's actually a really way of grounding, that interpersonal grounding of yourself with the support of others in the moment. How wonderful.
And I guess then, rather than trying to solve a problem, a solution in the moment starts emanating. It starts percolating up into the mind. And that's very different from thinking, okay, I've got to solve this. I've got to stop this. Or, what do I do? Tell me how I can stop this. Well, here are the answers. You can't stop it, but you can go and see your friend and have that cup of coffee that you were going to have together. And I just thought that was a really valuable moment. And it reminded me of a sort of jokey thing that people say in Zen meditation. It's, don't just do something, sit. Or don't do something about it, sit.
And actually what you're describing, Peter, is quite countercultural, isn't it? There is this idea of, doing. You need to, this kind of old authority, or this kind of authority position that gets kind of reactive. You get a reaction that you've got to do something in that moment, which is often done without thinking. And I'm just, as we're talking, thinking about, how will our listeners, how are they, whether they're parents, whether they're practitioners, how in their field work, in the work on the ground, in their lives, how do they notice their sort of first aid still box in the chaos?
Yeah.
What do they put in there? Who's in there? What kind of objects are in there?
I like that notion of the first aid still box. Who's in the still box? Which representations, which ideas, which forms of caring for oneself? The still box, when you think about when you raise the question, who's in your first aid still box, it also expands the idea of self-care to other care, interpersonal care, which I think is a systemic aspect. I think there is perhaps an individualization of self-care, and also a trivialization. Self-care is I don't know, it's face cream or
yeah.
the other, which, I mean, that's fine as well. But I think in a profound way that I think you're speaking to the restoring of connection with that community around you, whether colleagues or for the parent, the support network.
Yeah.
And that's a really important aspect of self-care. I was interested in something that you said almost fleetingly. You spoke about it being counterculture. And I was wondering whether you could say more about your thoughts, how that stillness in the chaos may be counterculture, may be linked to old authority. You also mentioned.
I think it's in our culture, whether we're in working in systems of, as you described, risk and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's in our health systems, in our care systems, that there's almost some bravado about being fast and about getting things done. That this sort of, and that our families we all get caught up in that and think that is the way to do things. And it's only when we hear the opposite. As that first time I met you, Peter, went in our training, and you sat in the middle of the first day of the training. You sat, didn't say a word. I think you were just breathing as we were all coming in, milling and chatting, sitting in our chairs, almost ignoring you, but your presence and your stillness as we were all kind of coming in, chatter, sitting down, emanated, and it was a difference, and it lasted. So I think there's something about this sort of authority or culture that says, speed, getting things done, working hard is the only way to do things, and how we resist that. I think it's how we resist that. And I'm thinking about, I don't know if you watch Strictly Come Dancing, Peter.
I have done.
Well, the last chap, Hamza Yassin, who won Strictly, is a Sudanese wildlife photographer who's never danced before, and he won the glitter ball. Yeah. And one of the things he said, and he came from Sudan as a child. I know this is going off piece slightly.
That's another topic, isn't it?
Off piece. He works, as a wildlife photographer in Scotland, as an African man with long dreadlocks, and he won the glitter ball, never danced before. And he says when they asked him what his secret was, and he says, slowly is the fastest way to get to where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Slowly is the fastest way.
Yeah.
And him saying that on TV, almost kind of at that level of society, gives sort of permission. It filters down to others that this is one way of doing things. This is an important way of doing it. It's an essential way. But slow is the fastest way.
I was just thinking when you said that of a distinction in the German language. There are two different words for activism. One is Aktivismus, which sounds just like activism, but the other one is Aktionismus. And the latter has negative connotations. It's sort of like it sounds like or feels like acting for the sake of acting, doing something for the sake of doing something so that you can convince yourself you're doing something, even if it may not be productive, even if it may not lead you anywhere closer to your aims. So I would imagine that the slow, and slow can be just slow for a moment sometimes. Doesn't mean that that you sort of walk slowly, that you talk slowly, It could just be a brief moment of halt.
Yes.
That could lead you towards this idea of activismus rather than actionismus, of activism which is grounded in yourself, in your connection with others, which brings you closer to your goals.
I love that brief moment of halt, that stillness before, choosing a position of, as you say, activism that's authentic.
Yeah.
That isn't something you read in a book, because we know our kids will say, oh, you've just read that, or you're doing that training. And as you're talking, I'm just remembering a dad recently was talking about, even though people say, this, that you're just giving in, that this is, you're not reacting. He says, I know, I've learned now over the couple of years that we've been working together, that actually it's a long game. So when I pause and I don't react, I know that this is because it's for the long game. Yeah. I'm here to stay.
And of course, that is often a misconception, that not reacting in the moment means giving in. By no means does not reacting in the moment necessarily mean giving in.
And I think we're coming to the end of this rich conversation. Is there any final words as we're halting?
I don't know. Do you have some final words?
No, I think it's been a pause in our day.
Yeah. I think we can invite our colleagues to experiment with pause, with stillness.
So it's goodbye from me.
And from me. Until next time.